She was invisible until the king saw her, and that one look destroyed everything. Welcome to a story of forbidden choices, brutal power, and survival in a world where love is the most dangerous rebellion. If you're ready to witness how a nameless servant became the queen who shattered an empire, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's begin. The fortress of Iron Peak stood like a scar against the northern sky. Gray stone, black iron, and walls thick enough to swallow screams. It wasn't built for beauty. It was built to endure, to crush, to remind anyone who lived within its shadow that survival here was earned in blood, and mercy was a word spoken only by the dead. Lyra Vance learned that lesson young. She learned it the first time someone spat at her feet in the kitchens and called her half-blood trash. She learned it again when the other servants whispered that her mother had been weak, that her father had been a coward, and that she, unlucky enough to inherit both bloods and belong to neither, was a mistake the fortress tolerated only because she worked harder than anyone else. So she became invisible. Not literally, of course. She still scrubbed floors, hauled water, stripped beds, and cleaned chamber pots. She still bled when the stone bit her knees and ached when the cold seeped into her bones. But she learned to move quietly, to speak only when spoken to keep her eyes down, her back bent, her existence so small that no one noticed her long enough to remember she was worth hating. It kept her alive. Barely. The wolf clans that ruled Iron Peak didn't have patience for weakness. They were descended from warriors who had clawed their way out of the frozen wastes, who had survived winters that killed whole villages, who had built their power on teeth and dominance, and the unshakable belief that strength was the only currency that mattered. If you were strong, you ruled. If you weren't, you served. And if you were neither, if you were half-blood, caught between human fragility and wolf instinct, you were nothing. Lyra had no pack, no family, no protection. Just a name no one bothered to use and a life measured in how many days she could go unnoticed. She was 17 when everything changed. It started the way most mornings did, cold, gray, and too damn early. Lyra woke before dawn in the servants' quarters, a cramped stone room that smelled like sweat and mildew, where 20 women slept on straw pallets barely thick enough to keep the floor from bruising their spines. The air was freezing. Her breath misted in front of her face as she sat up, wrapping her thin blanket around her shoulders and trying not to wake the others. She failed. "Oi? Half-blood." The voice came from the corner, sharp, annoyed, and unmistakably belonging to Mira, a wolf-born servant who had made it her life's mission to remind Lyra exactly where she stood. Lyra didn't respond. She pulled on her boots, worn leather, 2 sizes too big, stuffed with rags to keep them from slipping off, and tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. "I'm talking to you." "I know," Lyra said quietly, standing. She didn't look at Mira. Looking invited confrontation, and confrontation invited pain. "You're on King's quarters today." That made her pause. She turned slowly and met Mira's eyes for the first time. The other woman was smirking, her arms crossed over her chest, clearly enjoying whatever reaction she thought she'd get. "What?" "You heard me. Head housekeeper's orders. You're cleaning the king's private rooms." Mira's grin widened. "Guess she finally decided you were expendable enough." The other servants had gone quiet now, watching. A few of them looked uncomfortable. Most just looked curious. Lyra swallowed hard. "Why me?" "Because no one else wants to do it, half-blood. King Kyle doesn't tolerate mistakes. Last girl who spilled water on his maps got dragged out by her hair and reassigned to the stables. You think you're special?" Lyra didn't answer. She grabbed her cleaning rag from the hook by the door and left before anyone could see her hands, shaking. The king's quarters were in the highest tower of the fortress. A deliberate choice, people said, because King Kael Draven preferred to look down on the world that served him. Lyra had never been inside. She'd barely even seen him, except from a distance during formal gatherings, where he sat on a throne carved from blackwood and watched his court with the kind of stillness that made grown men nervous. He was young for a king, maybe 25, maybe less, but he ruled like someone who had been fighting since birth. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair that fell just past his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Handsome, if you liked the kind of face that looked like it had been carved with a blade instead of kissed by sunlight. Lyra didn't care about handsome. She cared about staying alive. She climbed the spiral staircase slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stone walls were colder here, the torches fewer. By the time she reached the top, her fingers were numb, and her breath came in short, shallow bursts. The door was massive, iron-banded oak, heavy enough that it took both hands to push it open. Inside the room was unexpected. She'd imagined something brutal, cold, a warrior's den filled with weapons and war trophies and the smell of blood. Instead, she found a space that was almost human. A large bed with dark furs, a desk cluttered with maps and letters, shelves lined with books, their spines cracked and worn from use, a fireplace, unlit, with ash still clinging to the hearth, and windows, tall, narrow windows that overlooked the wasteland beyond the fortress walls. It was quiet. Too quiet. Lyra stepped inside carefully, closing the door behind her. She set down her bucket and rag, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. The bed was unmade. The desk was a mess. There were boots by the door, mud still crusted on the soles. She started with the fireplace, knelt on the cold stone, scooped out the ash with her bare hands, and dumped it into the bucket. Her fingers turned black. Her knees ached, but she worked quickly, methodically, the way she'd been trained. She didn't hear him enter. "You're new." The voice came from behind her, low, rough, and far too close. Lyra froze. Her heart stopped. Her breath caught. She didn't turn around, didn't move, didn't even blink. "I asked you a question." She forced herself to stand slowly and turned to face him. King Cale Draven stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. He was dressed simply, dark trousers, a loose shirt unlaced at the collar, but there was nothing simple about the way he filled the space. He didn't need a crown to look like a king. Lyra dropped her gaze immediately, her pulse roaring in her ears. "Forgive me, Your Majesty. Yes, I'm new. To your quarters, I mean, not to the fortress. I've been here for—" "Look at me." She blinked. What?" "I said look at me." It wasn't a request. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her eyes, and for the first time in her life, someone saw her. Not the half-blood, not the servant, not the invisible girl who scrubbed floors and kept her head down. Her. Kael's expression didn't change. He studied her the way someone might study a map, carefully, thoroughly, like he was trying to figure out where she fit in a world that had already decided she didn't. "What's your name?" "Lyra, Your Majesty." "Lyra," he repeated, testing the word. Then quieter. "You're afraid of me." It wasn't a question. She didn't know how to answer, so she said nothing. Kael's jaw tightened. He stepped past her, moving toward the window, and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the wasteland. "Everyone is," he said finally. "Even the ones who pretend not to be." Lyra didn't know what to say to that, so she bent down, picked up her rag, and went back to work. She cleaned the hearth, straightened the bed, wiped down the desk without touching the maps. And the entire time she felt his eyes on her, not watching her work, but watching her like he was trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed. When she finished, she stood by the door, waiting to be dismissed. Kael didn't turn around. "You'll come back tomorrow," he said. "Your Majesty?" "Same time, same tasks." He paused. "And Lyra?" "Yes?" "Don't be afraid, I don't bite." She almost believed him. The next morning, Mira was waiting for her. "So? Did he kill you?" Lyra shook her head, pulling on her boots. "Did he yell?" "No." "Did he throw something?" "No." Mira frowned, clearly disappointed. "Then what happened?" "Nothing. I cleaned, he watched, I left." "That's it?" "That's it." But it wasn't, because that night, lying on her pallet in the dark, Lyra replayed the moment over and over again, the way Kael had looked at her, the way he'd said her name, the way his voice had sounded when he'd admitted that everyone was afraid of him. He hadn't sounded angry. He'd sounded tired. And for the first time in her life, Lyra wondered if maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who felt alone. The days blurred together after that. Every morning, she climbed the tower. Every morning, Kael was there, sometimes reading, sometimes pacing, sometimes just staring out the window like he was searching for something he'd lost. He didn't speak much, neither did she. But slowly, carefully, something shifted. It started small. One morning, he asked her if she was cold. She lied and said no. The next day, there was a fire burning in the hearth when she arrived. Another morning, he asked if she'd eaten. She lied again. That afternoon, there was bread and cheese waiting on the desk. She didn't thank him. She didn't know how. But she ate it, and he watched her, the same way he always did, like he was trying to figure out why someone like her existed in a world like this. "Why don't you fight back?" he asked one day. She looked up, startled. "What?" "The others. I've seen how they treat you. Why don't you fight back?" "Because fighting gets you killed, Your Majesty." "So does not fighting. At least this way I get to choose when." Kael went quiet. Then, so softly she almost didn't hear him. "That's not living. That's just surviving." "It's enough," she said. "Is it?" She didn't answer, because the truth was, she didn't know anymore. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of stolen moments, of quiet mornings, of conversations that felt too real, too honest, too dangerous. And then Lady Seraphine arrived. She came with an entourage of nobles, all perfumed silk and sharp smiles, and the entire fortress shifted to accommodate her. She was beautiful, everyone said so, powerful, connected. The perfect political match for a king who needed allies. Lyra watched from the shadows as Seraphine glided through the halls, her laughter ringing like glass breaking. And she watched as Kael stood beside her, his face blank, his hands clenched behind his back. That night, when Lyra climbed the tower, Kael was standing by the window again. "You should go," he said, without turning around. "Your Majesty?" "They're coming for me. The council, the nobles. They want me to choose her." "Then choose her." He turned, his eyes blazing. "You think I want this? I think you're the king. You do what you have to." "And what about what I want?" Lyra's breath caught. Kael stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the loneliness, the weight of a crown he'd never asked for. "What if I want something different?" he said quietly. "What if I want someone who sees me? Not the throne, not the power, just me." "Your Majesty." "Kael, my name is Kael." Her heart was racing now, too fast, too loud. "You can't," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I'm nothing, and you're everything. And this, whatever this is, it'll destroy us both." Kael reached out slowly and took her hand. His fingers were warm. "Then let it," he said. And in that moment, Lyra Vance, invisible, forgotten, half-blood survivor, made a choice that would change everything. She didn't pull away. The hand she held that night should have felt like a trap closing. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing she'd touched in years. Kael didn't speak. Neither did she. They stood there in the firelight, her calloused fingers wrapped in his, and for a moment the world outside that tower didn't exist. No council, no nobles, no whispers or bloodlines or rules carved into stone by people who'd never had to survive on scraps. Just two people who'd forgotten what it felt like not to be alone. Then Kael let go. "You should leave," he said, stepping back. His voice was rough, like the words hurt coming out. "Before someone sees you here this late." Lyra nodded, though her throat felt tight. She grabbed her bucket, her rag, anything to keep her hands busy, and moved toward the door. "Lyra?" She stopped but didn't turn around. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Come back tomorrow." She left without answering, because if she'd tried to speak, she wasn't sure what would come out. The walk down the spiral staircase felt longer than usual. Her legs shook. Her mind spun in circles, replaying everything. His hand, his words, the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, like she was real. By the time she reached the servants' quarters, the others were already asleep. She slipped into her pallet, pulled the thin blanket over her shoulders, and stared at the ceiling until the cold stone blurred. She didn't sleep. She couldn't, because somewhere between scrubbing floors and trying not to exist, she'd done the most dangerous thing a girl like her could do. She'd let herself hope. Morning came too fast. Lyra dragged herself out of bed, exhausted and shaky, her body protesting every movement. Mira was already awake, sitting on the edge of her pallet and watching with that sharp, knowing look that made Lyra's stomach turn. "Rough night?" Mira asked, her tone light but her eyes cold. "No. You look like hell." "Thanks." Mira stood, stretching. "King's quarters again today?" Lyra nodded, pulling on her boots. "Careful, half-blood. People are starting to notice." "Notice what?" "That you keep going up that tower and coming back down in one piece." Mira tilted her head, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. "Makes them wonder what you're doing up there." "Cleaning." "Sure." Mira leaned in closer, dropping her voice. "But if you're doing more than that, if you're stupid enough to think a king gives a damn about a servant, you should know how that story ends." Lyra didn't flinch. She'd learned a long time ago not to give people like Mira the satisfaction. "I'm not stupid," she said quietly. "Good. Then you'll remember your place." Lyra left before Mira could say anything else, but the words stuck with her all the way up the tower. Remember your place. As if she could forget. Kale was already awake when she arrived, standing by the window with his arms crossed. He didn't turn around when she entered, but she saw his shoulders tense. "You came," he said. "You told me to." "I wasn't sure you would." She set down her bucket and started working, sweeping ash from the hearth, even though it didn't need sweeping. Anything to keep her hands busy, anything to avoid looking at him. "Lyra." "Your Majesty." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Pretend last night didn't happen." Her hands stilled. She straightened slowly, brushing the ash off her palms, and finally looked at him. He was watching her the same way he always did, like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. But there was something else in his eyes now, something raw. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "The truth. The truth is that you're the king and I'm a servant, and whatever happened last night was a mistake." "Was it?" "Yes." "You're lying." "Maybe." She swallowed hard. "But it's the only answer that keeps us both alive." Kael moved toward her, slow and deliberate, until he was close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. He looked like he hadn't slept either. "I'm tired of lying," he said quietly. "I'm tired of pretending to be what they want. I'm tired of sitting in rooms full of people and feeling completely alone." "Then find someone who fits your world," Lyra said, her voice breaking. "Someone strong, someone powerful, someone who—" "I don't want someone who fits. I want someone who's real." "I'm not real. I'm nothing. Stop saying that." "Why? It's true." Kael reached out, his hand hovering near her face, but not quite touching. "You're the only person in this entire fortress who doesn't look at me and see a weapon. You see me. Do you know how rare that is?" "It doesn't matter. It's the only thing that matters." Lyra took a shaky breath, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "If they find out, if anyone finds out, they'll kill me. Or worse. And you. They'll take your crown. They'll call you weak. They'll let them. You don't mean that. Don't I?" She stared at him, searching his face for any sign that this was some kind of game, some kind of test. But all she saw was a man who'd been carrying the weight of the world for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to be free. "They're going to make you choose," she whispered. "Lady Seraphine, the council, they're going to force your hand." "I know. And when they do, I'll choose you." The words landed like a blow. Lyra stepped back, shaking her head. "You can't." "Watch me." "Kael, you don't understand. I'm half-blood. I don't belong in your world. I don't belong anywhere. If you choose me, it won't just ruin you. It'll start a war." "Then we'll fight." "I don't know how to fight." Kael's expression softened. He reached out again, and this time he didn't stop. His fingers brushed her cheek, rough and warm, and Lyra felt something inside her crack wide open. "Yes, you do," he said. "You've been fighting your whole life. You just didn't call it that." She wanted to argue, wanted to pull away, wanted to run down the tower and never come back. But she didn't. Instead, she closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his voice, The impossible, terrifying possibility that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. "This is insane," she whispered. "I know. We're both going to regret this. Probably. Then why? Because I'd rather regret something I did than spend the rest of my life regretting something I didn't." And just like that, the decision was made. Not with words, not with promises, just with the quiet, dangerous understanding that they'd both crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The shift was subtle at first. Lyra still came to the tower every morning, still cleaned, still kept her head down in the halls. But now, when she worked, Kyle talked. Not about politics or war or the weight of the crown, about everything else. He told her about the winters he'd survived as a boy, when the cold had been so brutal that entire villages had frozen overnight. About the first time he'd killed someone, a raider who'd tried to burn down the fortress, and how he'd thrown up afterward, shaking so hard he couldn't stand. He told her about his father, a king who'd ruled with an iron fist and a cold heart, and how Kyle had spent his entire childhood trying to earn a love that never came. And Lyra, who had spent her whole life staying silent, found herself talking back. She told him about her mother, a wolf-born woman who'd fallen in love with a human trader and paid for it with her life. About the way the other servants treated her, not with outright cruelty, but with the kind of casual disdain that made her feel like a ghost. She told him about the night she'd spent wondering if it would be easier to just disappear, to walk out into the wasteland and let the cold take her. "Why didn't you?" Kyle asked. Lyra shrugged. "Spite, maybe. Or stubbornness. I don't know. I just couldn't let them win." Kyle smiled, a small, sad thing. "That's not spite. That's strength. It doesn't feel like strength. It never does." The conversation stretched longer. The silences grew comfortable. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Lyra realized she wasn't invisible anymore. At least, not to him. But the rest of the fortress was a different story. Lady Seraphine moved through Iron Peak like she owned it, her presence impossible to ignore. She was everything Lyra wasn't: tall, graceful, draped in silk that shimmered like water. She had the kind of beauty that made people stop and stare, and the kind of power that made them bow. She was also calculating. Lyra saw it in the way Seraphine watched Kyle during meals, her smile never quite reaching her eyes, in the way she touched his arm when she spoke, her fingers lingering just a little too long, and she saw it in the way Seraphine looked at her. It happened in the Great Hall one evening, during a formal dinner Lyra had been assigned to serve. She moved between the tables with a pitcher of wine, keeping her head down, her movements careful. When she reached the head table, Seraphine's voice cut through the noise. "You there, servant?" Lyra froze. "Yes, my lady?" Seraphine's smile was sharp. "Pour for the king." Lyra stepped forward, her hand steady despite the way her heart was racing. She filled Kyle's cup, careful not to spill a drop. "Tell me," Seraphine said, her tone light but her eyes cold. "How long have you been serving His Majesty?" "A few weeks, my lady." "And do you enjoy it?" Yes, my lady." "Interesting." Seraphine leaned back in her chair, studying Lyra like she was an insect pinned to a board. "You're half-blood, aren't you?" The hall went quiet. Lyra's throat tightened. "Yes, my lady." "How unfortunate. It must be so difficult, not belonging to either world." Seraphine's smile widened. "But I suppose someone has to do the work no one else wants." Kale's jaw tightened. "Lady Seraphine, I'm only making conversation, Your Majesty." She turned her attention back to Lyra. "You may go." Lyra didn't wait. She set down the pitcher and walked away, her face burning, her hands clenched into fists. Behind her she heard Kyle's voice, low and dangerous. "That was unnecessary." "Was it?" Seraphine's tone was sweet. "I was simply reminding her of her place. Surely you don't object to that." Lyra didn't hear his response. But that night when she climbed the tower, Kyle was pacing like a caged animal. "She had no right," he said the moment Lyra stepped inside. "She's a noble. She has every right. Not to humiliate you in front of the entire court. I'm used to it." "Well, I'm not." Lyra set down her bucket and looked at him, really looked at him. His hands were shaking, his eyes were blazing. He looked like he wanted to tear the fortress apart stone by stone. "Kyle," she said softly, This is what I've been trying to tell you. This is what happens when someone like me gets too close to someone like you. People notice, and when they notice, they push back. Then let them push. I don't care. You should. Why? Because they won't just come after me. They'll come after you, and when they do, when they force you to choose between me and your crown, you'll realize I'm not worth it. Kale crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hands framing her face, his gaze locked on hers. You're worth everything, he said fiercely. Do you hear me? Everything. Lyra's breath caught. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. Then prove it, she whispered. I will. And for the first time, she believed him. But belief didn't change reality. The next morning, the council summoned Kael. Lyra heard about it from the other servants. Whispers in the kitchens, low voices in the corridors. The nobles were growing impatient. Lady Seraphine's family was demanding an answer. The alliance was too important to ignore. Kael had to choose. Lyra tried to work, tried to focus on scrubbing floors and hauling water and staying invisible, but her hands shook, her mind raced, and when the summons came, a young guard appearing at the servants' quarters, looking uncomfortable and avoiding everyone's eyes, her blood turned to ice. Lyra Vance? She stood slowly. Yes? The king requests your presence, immediately. The room went silent. Mira's eyes widened. Another servant gasped. Someone whispered, What did she do? Lyra didn't answer. She followed the guard out of the quarters, up the stairs, through corridors that felt too bright and too cold. But instead of the tower, he led her to the throne room. The doors were already open. Inside, the council sat in a semicircle, old men with hard eyes and expensive robes, their faces carved from stone. Lady Seraphine stood to one side, her expression unreadable. And at the center of it all, sitting on a throne that looked like it was trying to crush him, was Kael. His eyes found hers immediately. The head counselor, a gray-haired wolf named Aldrich, stepped forward. Lyra Vance, he said, his voice echoing through the hall. You stand accused of conduct unbecoming a servant of this fortress, of overstepping your station, of attempting to manipulate the king for personal gain. Lyra's heart stopped. That's not true, she said, her voice barely audible. Silence. Aldrich's gaze was ice. You will speak only when spoken to. Kael stood. Enough. Your Majesty. I said enough. Kael's voice rang through the hall, sharp and unyielding. She's done nothing wrong. Then why, Aldrich said slowly, does she spend hours alone in your private quarters? Why does she appear to have access no other servant has been granted? Because I allow it. And why would you allow such a thing? Kael's jaw tightened. The silence stretched, suffocating. And then, quietly, Kael said the words that changed everything. Because I care about her. The hall erupted. Aldrich's face went red. The other counselors shouted over each other. Seraphine's expression remained frozen, but her eyes burned. And Lyra felt the ground fall out from under her. Your Majesty, Aldrich said, his voice shaking with fury. You cannot be serious. I am. She is half-blood, a servant. She has no family, no status, no... She has me. This is madness. No. Kael stepped down from the throne, his eyes locked on Aldrich. Madness is pretending that bloodlines matter more than character. That power matters more than truth. I've spent my entire life playing by your rules, Aldrich, marrying who you tell me to marry, fighting wars you profit from. I'm done. If you choose her, Aldrich said slowly, you will lose everything. Your allies, your support, your crown. Then I'll lose it. Lyra couldn't breathe. Kael turned to her, his expression soft despite the chaos around them. Lyra, he said, I'm asking you to trust me. Just this once. And before she could answer, before she could even think, he reached out his hand, just like he had that first night in the tower. Lyra looked at him, at the council, their faces twisted with rage. She thought about Mira's warning, about the years she'd spent invisible, about every person who'd ever told her she was nothing. And then she thought about the boy who'd survived brutal winters, who'd killed and cried and carried a crown he never wanted. who'd looked at her and seen someone real. She took his hand. The room exploded. The room exploded. Voices crashed over each other like waves against stone, furious, disbelieving, sharp enough to draw blood. Aldrich's face had gone from red to purple, his mouth working around words that couldn't seem to form fast enough. The other counselors were on their feet, shouting, gesturing, their carefully controlled masks cracking wide open. Lady Seraphine stood perfectly still, her expression frozen in something that looked like shock but felt more like calculation. And in the center of it all, Kael held Lyra's hand like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to the ground. "This is treason," Aldrich finally managed, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You would throw away centuries of tradition, of survival, for a servant?" "I would throw away a system that values bloodlines over people," Kael said, his tone deadly calm. "Yes, you're a fool. Maybe, but I'm a fool who's done pretending." Another counselor, a thin man named Garrick, with a face like a hatchet, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, if you go through with this, the northern clans will withdraw their support. The western territories will see it as weakness. We'll be vulnerable to attack within a fortnight. Then we'll defend ourselves." "With what army? Half our forces are mercenaries loyal only to gold, and the other half follow the old families." Garrick's eyes flicked to Lyra, cold and dismissive. "No one will fight for her." Lyra's hand tightened in Kael's. She wanted to pull away, to disappear back into the invisible corners where she belonged, but his grip was firm. "They'll fight for me," Kael said, "and I'll fight for her. That's all that matters." "No." Aldrich's voice dropped, dangerous and low. "What matters is the survival of this fortress, of our people. You think love is stronger than politics? Than survival? You're more naive than I thought." "I think," Kael said slowly, "that a kingdom built on fear and oppression isn't worth saving." The silence that followed was suffocating. Aldrich stared at Kael like he'd just confessed to murder. The other counselors exchanged glances, some shocked, some calculating, all of them reassessing the boy king they thought they'd controlled. Seraphine finally spoke, her voice smooth as glass. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should discuss this privately, without distractions." Her eyes landed on Lyra. Kyle didn't move. "No, whatever you have to say, you can say in front of her." "Very well." Seraphine stepped forward, her silk gown whispering against the stone floor. "Let me be clear. If you choose this girl, my family will withdraw their alliance. The trade routes we control will close. The grain shipments that feed your people through the winter will stop. Iron Peak will starve." Lyra felt her stomach drop. Kael's expression didn't change. "Then we'll find another way." And "There is no other way. You know that." Seraphine's smile was thin. "Or perhaps you don't care. Perhaps you're so blinded by whatever spell this half-blood has cast that you're willing to let your people suffer for it." "She hasn't cast anything," Kael said, his voice hard. "And if you call her that again, alliance or not, I'll have you removed from this hall." Seraphine's smile widened. "So protective. How touching." "Enough." Aldrich raised his hand, his face carved from stone. "Your Majesty, we will give you until tomorrow's gathering to reconsider. If you insist on this madness, we will have no choice but to call for a vote of no confidence. The council will strip your title and name a new king. You can try. We will succeed." Aldrich's eyes were cold. "You're young, Kael. Strong, yes. But you underestimate how quickly power shifts when the ground beneath it cracks. Choose wisely." He turned and strode out of the hall, the other counselors following like wolves trailing their alpha. Seraphine lingered a moment longer, her gaze moving between Kael and Lyra. "I almost admire you," she said softly. "It's rare to see someone destroy themselves so thoroughly for something so fragile." Then she left, her footsteps echoing long after she'd disappeared through the doors. The hall fell silent. Kael let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his chest for years. His hand was still wrapped around Lyra's, his grip almost painful. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Lyra stared at him. "Am I all right? Kael, they just threatened to take your crown." I know. They're going to starve the fortress. I know. And you still? Her voice broke. Why would you do this? Why would you risk everything for you? He turned to face her fully, his eyes searching hers. Because I'd rather lose everything and have you than keep everything and lose myself. Lyra pulled her hand free, stepping back. Her chest felt too tight, her thoughts spinning too fast. This isn't romantic, Kael. This isn't some story where love conquers all. People are going to die because of this. Not if I can help it. You can't help it. You're one person. So are you. And you've survived worse than this. I survived by staying invisible. By not mattering. You just made me matter. And now, she pressed her hands to her face, trying to breathe. Now everyone's going to come for me. For us. And I don't know how to fight that. Kael moved closer, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Then we'll learn together. That's not a plan. It's the only one I have. Lyra wanted to scream, wanted to hit him, wanted to run, but she didn't. Because somewhere in the chaos, beneath the fear and the anger and the impossible weight of what he'd just done, she felt something else. Hope. Stupid, reckless, dangerous hope. They're going to kill me, she whispered, not while I'm breathing. And if they kill you first, Kael's jaw tightened. Then you run, as far and as fast as you can, and you survive, because that's what you do. Lyra shook her head, tears burning in her eyes. I don't want to survive without you. Then don't let them win. And just like that, the decision solidified. Not because it was smart, not because it was safe, but because she was so damn tired of being afraid. The fortress turned on them overnight. Lyra felt it the moment she stepped into the servants' quarters that evening. The air was different, charged, hostile. Conversations stopped when she entered. Eyes followed her across the room. Mira was waiting by her pallet, arms crossed. So it's true, she said. Lyra didn't answer. She sat down and started unlacing her boots, her hands shaking. The king chose you, a half-blood servant, in front of the entire council. I didn't ask him to. Doesn't matter. You're the reason we're all going to starve now. Lyra looked up sharply. What? Lady Seraphine's family controls the grain routes. Without them, we don't eat. And without food, people die. Mira leaned closer, her voice dropping. So congratulations. You got what you wanted, and the rest of us get to pay for it. I never wanted this. Then you should have said no. I tried. Not hard enough. Another servant, a young girl named Petra, spoke up from the corner. Is it true he's going to marry you? Lyra's throat tightened. I don't know. You don't know? Mira laughed, sharp and bitter. You just upended the entire political structure of the fortress, and you don't even know what's happening? Leave her alone, someone muttered. Why? She's the one who... She didn't force the king to do anything. He made his choice, and we're the ones who'll suffer for it. The argument spiraled, voices rising, accusations flying. Lyra sat in the middle of it, silent and small, feeling the weight of every word like stones piling on her chest. Finally, she stood. You're right, she said quietly. The room went silent. You're right. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want it. But it happened. And if you want to blame someone, blame me. Hate me. I don't care anymore. She grabbed her blanket, her hands shaking. But don't pretend you wouldn't have done the same thing if someone finally saw you as more than a tool. She walked out before anyone could respond. The cold night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't stop. She crossed the courtyard, climbed the tower stairs, and pushed open the door to Kael's quarters without knocking. He was standing by the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. They hate me, she said. I know. They're going to keep hating me. Probably. And you're okay with that? Kael turned, and for the first time she saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight, the cracks. No, he said honestly. I'm not okay with any of this. But I'm not going back. Lyra crossed the room and collapsed into the chair by the fire, her head in her hands. What happens at the gathering tomorrow? They'll force me to choose. Publicly. In front of every clan leader, every noble, every person who matters. And if you choose me, then they'll try to remove me. And if they can't, they'll try to kill me. Lyra's breath caught. Kael, I know the risks. I've known them since the moment I took your hand. He crouched in front of her, his eyes steady. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about us. It's about breaking a system that's been crushing people like you, like us, for generations. If I back down now, nothing changes. Ever. So I'm a symbol. No, you're a person. But what we represent together, that's bigger than both of us. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him. At the boy who'd been forced to be a king before he'd learned how to be human, who'd survived winters and wars, and a father who'd never loved him, who was now willing to lose everything for a girl who'd spent her whole life being nothing. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too. What if we lose? Then we lose together. She reached out and took his hand, the same way she had in the throne room. Okay, she said, then let's make it count. The gathering was held in the great hall at midday, when the sun was high enough to pour through the narrow windows and turn the stone floor into a chessboard of light and shadow. Every seat was filled. Clan leaders from across the territory, nobles draped in furs and silk, warriors with scars and cold eyes. They sat in a semicircle around the throne, watching, waiting. Lyra stood in the corner, half hidden behind a pillar, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She'd been told to stay in the servants' quarters, but Kael had sent a guard to bring her. He wanted her there. She didn't know if that was brave or suicidal. Kael sat on the throne, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. He wore his formal robes, black and gray, trimmed with silver, and the crown his father had worn before him. He looked every inch the king, but Lyra could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests. Aldrich stood at the center of the hall, his voice carrying easily over the crowd. We are gathered here to address a matter of great importance. His Majesty has been presented with an alliance that would secure our future, grain, trade, protection. Lady Seraphine of the Western clans has offered herself as a bride, a union that would benefit us all. Seraphine stepped forward, her gown shimmering in the sunlight. She smiled, gracious and perfect. And yet, Aldrich continued, His Majesty has chosen to pursue another option, one that undermines our traditions, weakens our alliances, and threatens our survival. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Aldrich turned to Kael. Your Majesty, the council asks that you reconsider. Choose Lady Seraphine, secure our future, or step aside and allow someone more suited to lead. Kael stood slowly, and the hall fell silent. I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. I became king at 16 because my father was killed in a battle he started out of pride. I fought wars I didn't believe in. I've enforced laws that crush the weak to protect the strong. And I've watched this fortress become a place where people survive. But they don't live. He stepped down from the throne, moving to the center of the hall. You want me to choose Lady Seraphine because it's smart, because it's safe, because it's what every king before me would have done. He paused. But I'm not every king, and I'm done pretending that power is more important than people. Aldrich's face darkened. Your Majesty. I'm not finished, Kael's voice rang out, sharp and unyielding. You say that choosing Lyra Vance will weaken us, that it will break our alliances, that it will make us vulnerable. And you're right, it will. But do you know what's weaker than that? A kingdom built on fear, on oppression, on the belief that some lives matter more than others because of the blood in their veins. He turned, his eyes scanning the crowd. Lyra Vance is a servant, a half-blood. By your standards, she's nothing. But she's survived in a world that's tried to break her since the day she was born. She's worked harder, endured more, and shown more courage than most of the people in this room ever will. And if you can't see the strength in that, then you're not the warriors you claim to be. You're just cowards hiding behind tradition. The hall erupted. Some shouted in agreement, others in fury. A clan leader stood, his face red. You would risk our lives for a girl? I would risk everything for a chance to build something better. Then you're a fool. Maybe. Kael's gaze hardened. But I'd rather be a fool who tried than a coward who didn't. He turned, his eyes finding Lyra's across the hall. And then he did the unthinkable. He walked toward her. Every step echoed through the silence. Every eye followed. When he reached her, he held out his hand. "Lyra Vance," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Will you stand with me?" Lyra's entire body was shaking. She could feel the weight of every gaze, the heat of every judgment, the sharpness of every whispered word. She thought about running, about disappearing, about letting him face this alone. But then she looked at him, at the boy who'd chosen her when no one else ever had, and she realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore, and she didn't want to be. So she stepped forward, out of the shadows, into the center of the hall, and she took his hand. The crowd exploded. Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos. "This is treason! The council will not stand for—" "Then remove me!" Cale's voice was ice. "If you think you can." For a moment, no one moved, and then Aldrich smiled, cold and sharp. "Very well. By the power vested in this council, I hereby call for a vote of no confidence. All in favor of stripping Kyle Draven of his title and crown, raise your hand." Hands rose. Not all of them. But enough. Kale didn't flinch. "Then I invoke the old law," he said quietly. Aldrich's smile faltered. "What?" "The law of challenge. If the council believes I'm unfit to rule, they can name a champion, and I'll fight for my crown." The hall went dead silent. Aldrich stared at him. "You can't be serious." "I am." "You'll die." "Maybe. Or maybe I'll prove that strength isn't just about bloodlines and politics. Maybe I'll prove that it's about conviction." Aldrich's jaw tightened. He turned to the crowd. "Does anyone accept this challenge?" For a long moment, no one spoke. And then a figure stepped forward from the back of the hall. Tall, broad-shouldered, scarred. A warrior Lyra didn't recognize, but from the way the crowd shifted, she knew he was dangerous. "I do," the man said. Kael's expression didn't change, but Lyra felt his hand tighten around hers. "Then we fight at dawn," Kael said. The warrior smiled. "I'll see you in the ring, boy king." He turned and walked out, and the hall emptied slowly, people filing out in whispers and glances. When they were alone, Lyra finally found her voice. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Probably. And you're still doing this." "Yes." "Why?" Kael turned to her, his eyes fierce. "Because if I don't, nothing changes, and I'd rather die trying than live knowing I didn't." Lyra's vision blurred. She pulled him close, her arms wrapping around him, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. "Don't you dare die on me," she whispered. "I won't." "Promise." "I promise." But as they stood there in the empty hall, the sunlight fading and the shadows growing long, Lyra knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow, everything would change. And there was no going back. There was no going back. The night stretched endless and cold. Lyra sat in Kael's quarters, perched on the edge of a chair that felt too large for her, watching him pace the room like a wolf in a cage. He hadn't stopped moving since they'd left the hall. Back and forth, his boots scraping against the stone floor in a rhythm that was starting to drive her mad. "You need to rest," she said finally. "I can't." "You're going to fight at dawn if you don't sleep." "I said I can't." His voice was sharp, frayed at the edges. Lyra stood and moved in front of him, blocking his path. He stopped, his jaw tight, his eyes wild. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "There's nothing to say." "You're terrified. I can see it." Kael let out a breath that sounded like it had been ripped from his chest. "Of course I'm terrified. Do you know who that man is? Ronan Blackridge. He's killed 16 men in the ring. 16. He doesn't lose." "Then why did Aldrich choose him?" "Because Aldrich wants me dead. And Ronan's the surest way to make that happen." Kael ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders sagging. "I can fight. I've trained my whole life. But Ronan's different. He doesn't just win. He destroys people." Lyra reached out and took his hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then don't fight like him. Fight like you." "And what does that mean?" "It means you're not a brute. You're smart. You think. You survive." She squeezed his hands. "He's stronger, maybe. But you're not fighting to kill him. You're fighting to prove a point, and that's something he'll never understand." Kael's expression softened, just a fraction. "You really believe that?" "I have to, because if you die tomorrow, I'm next." He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and for a moment they just stood there. Two people who'd been alone their entire lives, holding on to the only thing that felt real. "I'm not going to die," he said quietly. "You promised." "I know." "Then keep it." He kissed the top of her head, and Lyra felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and courage and all the other things people wrote songs about were enough to keep him alive. But she'd lived in this world too long to believe in fairy tales. So instead, she made a decision. If Kael wasn't going to survive on strength alone, then she'd make sure he had something else, an edge. Bas. She waited until he finally collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and half asleep, before slipping out of the room. The fortress was quiet at this hour, the corridors empty except for the occasional guard. Lyra kept her head down, her footsteps soft, and made her way to the one place she knew people talked when they thought no one was listening. The kitchens. The night staff was small, just a handful of older women preparing bread for the morning. They looked up when Lyra entered, their expressions wary. "What do you want?" one of them asked. Her name was Bessa, and she'd been working in the kitchen since before Lyra was born. "I need to know about Ronan Blackridge." Bessa's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because he's going to fight the king at dawn, and I need to know how to beat him." "You can't." "Then I need to know how to survive him." The women exchanged glances. Finally, Bessa sighed and gestured to a stool. "Sit. But if anyone asks, we didn't talk." Lyra sat. Bessa pulled a loaf of bread from the oven and set it on the counter, her movements slow and deliberate. "Ronan Blackridge is a mercenary. He fights for whoever pays the most. No loyalty, no honor, just coin." "What's his weakness?" "He doesn't have one. That's why he's still alive." "Everyone has a weakness." Bessa paused, her hands stilling. "There's a rumor. Just a rumor. But they say he's got a bad knee, left side. Took an arrow there years ago, and it never healed right. He hides it well, but if you watch close, you can see him favor his right leg." Lyra's pulse quickened. "Are you sure?" "No, like I said, it's a rumor. But if the king's smart, he'll test it, push Ronan to move, make him work. A man that size can't stay light on his feet forever, especially if one leg's doing all the work." Another woman spoke up from the corner, Petra's mother, a gray-haired woman with sharp eyes. "There's something else. Ronan's got to tell. When he's about to go for a kill strike, he shifts his weight back first. Just a fraction, but it's there." "How do you know that?" Lyra asked. "Because I watched him kill my nephew 3 years ago. I've seen that move in my nightmares every night since." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "If the king sees it coming, he might have a chance to dodge." Lyra stood, her mind racing. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Ronan's not the only problem." "What do you mean?" Bessa's expression darkened. "Aldrich's been meeting with people, quiet-like, in corners. I've seen him talking to the guard captain, to some of the clan leaders. Whatever happens tomorrow, he's got a plan, and it's not just about the fight." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of plan?" "The kind that ends with the king dead one way or another." Lyra's hands clenched into fists. "Then we stop him." "How? You're a servant, and the king's already painted a target on his back." "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." Bessa studied her for a long moment, then shook her head. "You've got guts, girl. I'll give you that. But guts don't stop swords." "No, but they're a start." Lyra turned to leave, but Bessa called after her. "Wait." Lyra stopped. Bessa reached into her apron and pulled out a small vial filled with dark liquid. "Give this to the king. Have him rub it on his hands and forearms before the fight. It'll make his skin tacky, help him grip better when he's covered in sweat and blood." "What is it?" "Tree sap mixed with ash. Old fighter's trick. Won't help much, but every little bit counts." Lyra took the vial, her throat tight. "Why are you helping me?" "Because some of us are tired of watching good people get crushed by bad systems." Bessa's eyes were hard. "And because if that boy in the tower actually means what he says, if he's really going to change things, then he deserves a fighting chance." Lyra didn't sleep that night. She climbed back to Kael's quarters and found him still asleep, his face finally peaceful. She sat by the window and watched the sky slowly shift from black to gray, her mind turning over everything Bessa had said. Ronan's knee, the tell before his kill strikes, Aldrich's plan, the weight of what was coming. By the time the sun crept over the horizon, she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to sit in the shadows and hope. She was going to fight, not with fists or swords. She didn't know how to use either, but with the only weapon she had, her voice, her eyes, her ability to see the things others missed. When Kyle woke, she was still sitting by the window. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice rough. "No." "Lyra, Ronan has a bad knee, left side. If you can get him moving, make him put weight on it, he'll slow down." Kyle sat up, rubbing his eyes. "How do you know that?" I asked. "Who?" "People who pay attention. People like me." She turned to face him. "And there's more. He has a tell before he goes for a kill strike. He shifts his weight back first. If you see it, you can dodge." Kale stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "You went out in the middle of the night to gather intelligence." "I did what I had to." "You could have been caught. Aldrich could have—" "Aldrich's planning something. I don't know what. But he's not going to let you win, even if you beat Ronan." She crossed to the bed and held out the vial. "Use this. It'll help you grip." Kale took the vial, his hands wrapping around hers. "You're incredible." "I'm terrified." "That doesn't make you any less incredible." She sat beside him on the bed. "Promise me something." "Anything. If this goes wrong, if Aldrich's plan works and you can't stop it, promise me you'll run. Just run, and don't look back." "I'm not leaving you." "Kale—" "No. We do this together, or not at all." His grip tightened. "I didn't choose you so you could watch me die. I chose you so we could build something better, and that doesn't work if either of us runs." Lyra's vision blurred. She pressed her forehead against his. "Then let's make sure we both survive." "Deal." They sat there in the growing light, holding each other, until the bells rang to signal the start of the challenge. The ring was set up in the center courtyard, a circle of packed dirt surrounded by stone benches that had been dragged out for the occasion. By the time Kyle and Lyra arrived, the crowd was already thick, hundreds of people packed shoulder to shoulder, their voices a low, buzzing hum. Lyra stood at the edge, her heart hammering, her hands clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. She scanned the crowd, looking for anything suspicious, any sign of Aldrich's plan. She spotted him standing near the front, his expression carefully neutral, too neutral. Beside him stood 3 guards she didn't recognize. Their hands rested on their sword hilts, their eyes tracking Kyle's every movement. Lyra's stomach dropped. Kale walked to the center of the ring, stripped down to his trousers and boots, his chest bare. He'd rubbed the sap mixture on his hands and forearms, and in the morning light, his skin had a faint sheen. He looked young without the robes and crown. Vulnerable. Ronan Blackridge entered from the opposite side, and the crowd roared. He was massive, easily a head taller than Kyle, with shoulders like boulders and arms thick as tree trunks. Scars crisscrossed his chest and back, each one a story of survival. His face was brutal, all hard angles and cold eyes. He looked like he'd been carved from stone, and he looked like he was going to enjoy this. Aldrich stepped into the ring, his voice carrying over the crowd. "The challenge has been accepted. The rules are simple. No weapons, no interference. The fight ends when one man yields or dies." Kale didn't flinch. Ronan smiled, slow and cruel. Aldrich stepped back. "Begin." The crowd erupted. Ronan moved first, faster than Lyra expected for a man his size. He lunged forward, his fist swinging in a brutal arc aimed at Kyle's head. Kyle ducked, spinning to the side, his movements quick and light. Ronan's fist connected with empty air. The crowd murmured. Ronan turned, his smile fading. He came at Kyle again, this time with both fists, a relentless barrage that forced Kyle to backpedal, dodging and weaving. But Lyra saw it, the way Ronan's left leg moved just a fraction slower, the way he pivoted on his right. Kale saw it too. He darted to Ronan's left, forcing the bigger man to shift his weight. Ronan snarled and followed, his movements just a hair off. Kyle struck, not hard, but precise. A jab to Ronan's ribs, then another to his side, each one designed to make him move, to test that knee. Ronan swung again, his fist grazing Kyle's shoulder and sending him stumbling. The crowd gasped. Kale rolled, came up on his feet and spat blood into the dirt. Ronan charged. This time, Kael didn't dodge. He stepped into the charge, dropping low and driving his shoulder into Ronan's left knee. Ronan's leg buckled. He went down hard, his weight crashing into the dirt, and for the first time the crowd went silent. Kael scrambled back, breathing hard, his chest heaving. Ronan pushed himself up slowly, his face twisted with rage. His left leg shook when he put weight on it. "You're fast," Ronan said, his voice like gravel, "but speed won't save you." He came at Kael again, slower this time, but more deliberate. Each step calculated, each swing meant to kill. Kael dodged the first, blocked the second, but the third caught him across the jaw, and he went down hard. Lyra's breath stopped. The crowd roared. Ronan loomed over Kael, his fist raised for the finishing blow. And then Lyra saw it. The shift in Ronan's weight, the subtle movement backward, the tell. "Kael!" she screamed. "He's going for the kill! Move!" Kael's eyes snapped open. He saw it too, the fraction of a second where Ronan's weight shifted back. He rolled. Ronan's fist slammed into the dirt where Kael's head had been. Kael kicked, hard and fast, right into Ronan's left knee. Ronan howled. His leg gave out completely, and he collapsed onto one knee. Kael surged up, his movements desperate and clumsy, and drove his elbow into Ronan's temple. Ronan swayed. Kael hit him again, and again, until finally Ronan fell forward, his massive body crashing into the dirt. He didn't get up. The crowd exploded. Kael stood over Ronan's prone form, breathing hard, his face bloodied and his body shaking. He looked like he might collapse at any second, but he was alive. He'd won. Lyra felt tears streaming down her face, her chest so tight she thought it might break. But the fight wasn't over, because as the crowd surged forward, shouting and cheering, she saw Aldrich lean toward one of the guards, saw the guard nod, saw the flash of steel. "Kael!" she screamed. He turned just as the guard lunged, a dagger aimed at his back. But before the blade could strike, someone else moved. A figure from the crowd, a young wolf-born warrior Lyra vaguely recognized from the fortress, grabbed the guard's arm and twisted, sending the dagger clattering to the ground. "Enough!" the warrior shouted. The crowd went silent. The warrior turned to Aldrich, his eyes blazing. "You would dishonor the challenge, dishonor the king." Aldrich's face went pale. "I don't know what you're—" "We all saw it." The warrior gestured to the crowd. "The guard was yours. The blade was yours. You tried to have him killed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, shocked, angry, disbelieving. Other voices joined in. "I saw it too. The counselor's a traitor. He tried to murder the king." Kael stepped forward, his voice steady despite the blood dripping from his lip. "Is this true, Aldrich?" Aldrich said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Kael's expression hardened. "Then you're no longer on my council. You're stripped of your title, your lands, everything. Get out." "You can't." "I just did." Kael's voice rang out, cold and final. "Anyone who stands with him can leave too." No one moved. Aldrich looked around, his face twisted with fury and disbelief. But when no one spoke, when no one stepped forward to defend him, he turned and walked out of the ring. The crowd parted to let him through, their silence more damning than any accusation. And when he was gone, the courtyard erupted in cheers. Kael turned to Lyra, and she ran to him, throwing her arms around him despite the blood and sweat and the eyes of hundreds watching. "You're alive," she whispered. "I promised. Don't ever do that again." He laughed, shaky and raw, and held her tighter. "No guarantees." The warrior who'd stopped the guard approached, bowing slightly. "Your Majesty, I apologize for interfering, but—" "You saved my life," Kael said. "What's your name?" "Gareth, Your Majesty. I serve in the Eastern Watch." "Not anymore. You're now captain of my personal guard." Gareth's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, That's an order." Gareth bowed deeper. "It would be my honor." And for the first time since this all began, Lyra felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. The days that followed were a blur. Aldrich fled the fortress, taking a handful of loyalists with him. Seraphine left without a word, her entourage trailing behind her like ghosts. The council reformed with new voices, people who'd been ignored, pushed aside, dismissed. People who understood what it meant to survive. And Kael, bloodied but standing, began the slow, painful work of rebuilding. Lyra didn't hide anymore. She walked through the halls with her head up. She ate in the great hall instead of the kitchens. She stood beside Kael when he held court, not as a servant, but as an equal. People noticed. Some whispered, some stared. But slowly, so slowly it felt like watching ice melt, things began to shift. One morning, a young servant approached her in the corridor. "Lady Lyra?" Lyra blinked. "I'm not—" "The king asked me to give you this." The girl handed her a sealed letter and hurried away before Lyra could respond. Lyra broke the seal and read, "Meet me at the border. There's something you need to see. K." She found Kael waiting at the edge of the fortress, his horse already saddled. Beside him stood Gareth and 2 other guards. "What's going on?" she asked. "Trouble. The northern clans are moving, raiders probably, maybe worse." He held out his hand. "I need you with me." "Why?" "Because you see things I don't, and because I trust you more than anyone else." Lyra stared at him. Then she took his hand and let him pull her onto the horse behind him. They rode hard, the wind biting at their faces, until they reached the northern watchpost. The captain was waiting, his face grim. "Your Majesty, we've spotted movement, a lot of it. They're not raiders." "Then what are they?" "Refugees, hundreds of them, maybe more. They're fleeing something." Kael dismounted and climbed to the top of the watchtower. Lyra followed. From the height she could see them, a long, ragged line of people moving slowly across the wasteland. Families, children, the old and the sick. They looked half frozen, half starved. "What happened to them?" Lyra whispered. "I don't know, but they're heading here." Kael turned to the captain. "Open the gates. Bring them in." The captain hesitated. "Your Majesty, we don't have the supplies to—" "I don't care. Open the gates. We'll figure out the supplies later." "But the council answers to me, and I'm telling you to open the gates." The captain nodded and hurried away. Lyra looked at Kael. "You know this is going to cause problems." "I know. The fortress can barely feed the people we have. If we take in hundreds more, then we'll find a way. We always do." He turned to her. "You ready?" "For what?" "To prove that this fortress isn't just about survival anymore. It's about something better." Lyra looked out at the refugees, at the mothers carrying children, at the old men struggling through the snow, at the desperate hope in their faces. And she thought about the girl she'd been just weeks ago. Invisible. Forgotten. Convinced she didn't matter. She thought about Kael's hand in hers, about the fight in the ring, about Aldrich's face when the crowd turned against him, about the slow, impossible shift happening inside these stone walls. "Yeah," she said quietly, "I'm ready." The gates opened with a groan of metal and wood. The refugees poured in, their voices rising in relief and gratitude. Kael and Lyra descended from the tower and walked among them, listening to their stories. A village burned by raiders. Crops destroyed by early frost. Children sick with fever. Stories Lyra knew too well. One woman grabbed her hand, her eyes wet. "Thank you. Thank you for letting us in." "Don't thank me," Lyra said. "Thank him." She pointed to Kael, who was crouched beside a sick child, his voice low and calm. The woman looked at Kael, then back at Lyra. "You're the one they're talking about, the servant who became queen." "I'm not queen yet." "You will be." The woman squeezed her hand. "And when you are, don't forget us. Don't forget what it's like to be powerless." Lyra's throat tightened. "I won't, I promise." As the sun set and the refugees settled into temporary shelters in the courtyard, Lyra stood beside Kael and watched. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she said. "Yeah. It's going to get harder. Probably. But we're going to do it anyway." Kael smiled, tired but real. "Yeah, we are." And as the first stars appeared in the sky above Iron Peak, Lyra realized something. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't a servant. She was a queen in the making. And the world was starting to see it. And the world was starting to see it. But seeing was one thing. Accepting was another. The refugees brought more than gratitude. They brought hunger, disease, fear. Within 3 days, the fortress kitchens were running dangerously low. The healers worked day and night treating frostbite and fever. The makeshift shelters in the courtyard turned the space into a sprawling camp that stank of unwashed bodies and desperation. The complaints started almost immediately. Lyra heard them everywhere, in the corridors, in the great hall, even in the kitchens where she'd once scrubbed floors. We can't feed our own people, and now we're feeding strangers. The king's lost his mind. That half-blood's poisoned him, made him soft. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on helping where she could, distributing blankets, organizing work crews, sitting with sick children while their parents searched for food. But the whispers followed her like shadows. One afternoon, she found Mira in the servants' quarters, surrounded by a cluster of women. They went quiet when Lyra entered. "Don't stop on my account," Lyra said, grabbing a clean rag from the shelf. Mira stood, arms crossed. "We were just talking about how the kitchens are running out of grain, how the healers are out of medicine, how people who've lived here their whole lives are going hungry so strangers can eat. They're not strangers. They're people. They're your people. Your responsibility, because you convinced the king to let them in. Kael made that decision himself. After you got in his head," Mira stepped closer. "You think we don't see what's happening? You think we don't know that every choice he makes now goes through you first?" Lyra's hands tightened on the rag. "That's not true, isn't it? A month ago, you were scrubbing chamber pots. Now you're standing beside the king like you belong there. And the rest of us? We're still here, still invisible, still doing the work while you play queen." The room was silent. Every eye was on Lyra, waiting. She could have walked away, should have walked away. But she was tired of running. "You're right," she said quietly. "I was invisible, just like you. Just like everyone in this room who's been told their whole lives that they don't matter, and I could have stayed that way, could have kept my head down and survived. But I didn't, because someone finally saw me, and I'm not going to apologize for that. Easy for you to say when you're sleeping in the tower while we're sleeping on stone. You think I'm comfortable up there? You think I don't wake up every morning terrified that this is all going to fall apart? That someone's going to put a knife in my back or in his?" Lyra's voice cracked. "I didn't ask for this. But I'm here, and I'm trying to make it mean something. By starving the fortress? By proving we're better than the system that's been crushing us." Mira scoffed. "You sound like him now. Good, because he's right. He's going to get us all killed. Maybe. Or maybe he's going to save us." Lyra met Mira's eyes. "But either way, I'm not backing down. So if you want to hate me, fine. Hate me. Just don't pretend you wouldn't do the same thing if you had the chance." She turned and walked out before anyone could respond. Her hands were shaking, her throat was tight, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Tut. She found Kyle in the council chamber, bent over a map with Gareth and 2 new council members, a grizzled former soldier named Marcus and a sharp-eyed merchant named Alara, who'd been managing trade routes for decades. "We need grain," Alara was saying. "The western supply lines are still controlled by Seraphine's family. They won't trade with us. Not after what happened." "Then we find another source," Kyle said. "There isn't one. Not this late in the season. The northern clans won't share. The eastern territories are barely feeding themselves." "What about the southern villages?" Gareth asked. "Too far. We'd lose half the shipment to raiders before it reached us." Kale straightened, rubbing his eyes. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. "Your Majesty," Marcus said carefully, "we have another option." "What?" "Send the refugees away. We gave them shelter. We gave them food. But we can't sustain this. If we keep them, we all starve." "No." "Your Majesty." "I said no. Then what do you suggest?" Ilara's voice was sharp. "Because right now, we're 3 weeks from running out of food entirely. And when that happens, it won't just be the refugees who suffer. It'll be everyone." Kale's jaw tightened. "Then we ration. We cut back. We're already rationing. We're already cutting back. There's nothing left to cut." The room fell silent. Lyra stepped forward. "What if we don't trade for grain?" Everyone turned to look at her. "What if we trade for seeds instead?" she continued. "And tools. We've got hundreds of people here who need work. What if we put them to work building greenhouses? Growing food inside the fortress walls?" Alara frowned. "That would take months, maybe years." "Then we start now. And in the meantime, we send out hunting parties, fishing expeditions. We use every resource we have." Lyra looked at Kyle. You said this fortress has survived on strength and dominance. But strength isn't just about fighting. It's about adapting, about finding solutions no one else has thought of. Marcus shook his head. It's a nice idea, girl, but ideas don't fill empty bellies. No, but they give people hope. And right now, hope's the only thing keeping this place from tearing itself apart. Kyle was staring at her, something shifting in his expression. It could work. Your Majesty, it could work. He turned to Alara. How many seeds can we get? How many tools? If we liquidate some of the treasury? Enough to start. But it won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. Kyle looked at Gareth. Organize the hunting parties. Marcus, I want you overseeing the construction. Alara, start reaching out to traders who'll deal with us. Quietly. I don't want word getting back to the Western clans. The council members exchanged glances, then nodded. As they filed out, Kale caught Lyra's hand. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For seeing the solution I couldn't. You would have figured it out, maybe. But you got there faster. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. I don't know what I'd do without you. You'd survive. You always do. Not like this. Not as well. Lyra closed her eyes, breathing him in. We're going to make this work. I know. Even if it kills us. Especially if it kills us. She laughed, shaky and exhausted, and held him tighter. The work began the next day. Hunting parties rode out at dawn, their faces grim but determined. Construction crews cleared space in the inner courtyard, tearing down old storage sheds to make room for greenhouses. Refugees who'd been sitting idle were given tools, given purpose, given a reason to believe they weren't just charity cases waiting to die. Lyra worked alongside them. She hauled stones, hammered nails, dug trenches for water channels. Her hands blistered, her back ached. By the end of each day, she could barely stand. But she kept going. People stared at first, whispered. A few even laughed. Look at the queen-to-be playing in the dirt. She'll give up by tomorrow. She's just doing it for show. But the laughter stopped when tomorrow came and she was still there. And the day after that. And the day after that. Slowly, the whispers changed. Did you see her lifting those beams? She's been working since dawn. Maybe she's not as soft as we thought. One afternoon, a refugee woman approached her, an older woman named Senna, who'd lost her husband to the raiders. She had 3 children, the youngest barely 6 years old. You didn't have to do this, Senna said, handing Lyra a water skin. Do what? Work like us. She hesitated. You're with the king. You could be sitting in comfort. Comfort doesn't build greenhouses. Senna smiled. No, I suppose it doesn't. She paused, watching Lyra wipe the sweat from her face. My daughter's been asking about you. She wants to know if the stories are true. What stories? That you were a servant, that the king chose you over a noble, that you're going to change things. Lyra took a drink, the water cool against her parched throat. I don't know about changing things. I'm just trying to survive. Surviving is changing things, at least for people like us. Senna's eyes were steady. We've spent our whole lives being told we don't matter, that we're expendable. And then you come along, a half-blood servant who somehow became more than what they said she could be. That matters, more than you know. Lyra looked at the woman, really looked at her, at the lines around her eyes, the calluses on her hands, the quiet strength that came from enduring things that should have broken her. Tell your daughter, Lyra said slowly, that the stories are true, and that if she wants to change things too, she doesn't have to wait for someone else to do it. She can start now, today, right here. Senna's eyes glistened. She nodded, then turned back to her work. And Lyra felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe she couldn't change the whole world, but she could change this small piece of it, one person at a time. But not everyone was convinced. 2 weeks into the construction, a clan leader named Veyron arrived at the fortress gates. He was old-blood wolf, with silver hair and eyes like ice, and he commanded 3 smaller clans in the eastern hills. His reputation preceded him, a traditionalist who believed in the old ways, in blood and hierarchy, and the unshakable order of things. Kael met him in the great hall, with Lyra standing at his side. Veyron didn't bother with pleasantries. I've heard disturbing rumors, he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. That you're harboring refugees, that you're building, what? Greenhouses? Inside a military fortress? That's correct, Kael said calmly. And you're doing this instead of securing alliances? Instead of strengthening our defenses? I'm doing this because it strengthens our defenses. A starving population is a weak population. A desperate population turns on itself. A starving population is a dead population, which is what you'll have if the Western clans decide to attack. Veyron's eyes flicked to Lyra, cold and dismissive. And you're still keeping this girl at your side. Her name is Lyra, and yes, she's half-blood. She has no claim to power, no legitimacy, no lineage worth mentioning. She has my trust. That's all the legitimacy she needs. Veyron's expression hardened. The old families won't stand for this. You're spitting on centuries of tradition, on the very foundations that built this fortress and kept our people alive through winters that would have killed softer civilizations. Good, because those foundations are rotten. Kyle stepped forward, his voice steady but edged with steel. You want to talk about tradition? Fine. Let's talk about how tradition says some people matter more than others based on blood they didn't choose. How tradition keeps people trapped in systems designed to crush them. How tradition protects the powerful and abandons everyone else to freeze or starve or disappear. Tradition keeps us alive. No. Fear keeps us alive. Fear and violence and the willingness to sacrifice anyone who doesn't fit the mold. Kael's jaw tightened. And I'm done living that way. I'm done watching good people suffer because someone decided centuries ago that their blood wasn't pure enough. Veyron stared at him, his face unreadable. You're a fool. You're the second person to say that this month. I'm starting to think it's a badge of honor. This isn't a joke, boy. I'm not laughing. Kyle's voice dropped, cold and unyielding. I'm building something better, and if you can't see that, if you'd rather cling to a dying system than help create a new one, then you can leave. No one's forcing you to stay. Veyron's jaw tightened. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he turned to Lyra. You, he said, do you truly believe this will work? Lyra's heart hammered. Every eye in the room was on her. She could feel the weight of generations of tradition pressing down, waiting to crush her if she said the wrong thing. She thought about lying, about saying what he wanted to hear, but she was done being invisible, done shrinking herself to fit someone else's expectations. I believe, she said carefully, meeting his ice-cold gaze, that survival isn't enough. It never was. People need more than food and shelter. They need dignity, purpose, a reason to keep fighting when everything else tells them to give up. And if this fortress can give them that, if we can prove that strength isn't just about dominance, but about compassion and cooperation, then yes, I believe it'll work. She paused, then added quietly, but even if it doesn't, even if we fail spectacularly, at least we tried. At least we chose to be something better than what came before. And that has to count for something. Veyron studied her for a long moment. His expression gave nothing away. Then slowly he nodded. You've got courage, he said. I'll give you that. More than most nobles I've met. He turned back to Kael. I'll support you, for now. But if this fails, if the fortress falls because of your idealism, I'll be the first to say I told you so. Fair enough, Kael said. Veyron's eyes narrowed. And one more thing. If you're going to marry this girl, and I assume that's where this is heading, do it properly, not some quiet ceremony in the shadows. Make it public. Make it official. Force the other clans to acknowledge her, because if you don't, they'll never accept her, and she'll spend the rest of her life fighting battles that should have been settled from the start. Kael glanced at Lyra, something unreadable in his expression. I'll consider it. Don't consider. Do. Veyron pulled his cloak tighter. You're gambling everything on this, boy. Make sure the stakes are clear. He left without another word. When the doors closed, Kael let out a breath he'd been holding. That went better than I expected. He's going to be watching, Lyra said, waiting for us to fail. Then we won't fail. And if we do, then we fail together. Kael took her hand. But Lyra, he's right about one thing. If we're doing this, we need to do it properly. I need to marry you, publicly, in a way that forces everyone to acknowledge what you are. And what am I? My equal, my partner, my queen. Lyra's breath caught. Kael, I know it's fast, I know it's insane, but we're past the point of playing it safe. His eyes were fierce. Will you marry me? Not because tradition demands it, not because it's politically convenient, but because I love you, and because I want to spend whatever time we have left building something better together. Lyra stared at him, her heart racing. Then she smiled, small and fragile and real. Yes, she whispered. Yes. 3 weeks later, the first crops sprouted. They were small, fragile, just tiny green shoots pushing through the soil like defiant fists. But they were alive. The refugees gathered around the greenhouses, staring in wonder. Some cried, some laughed, some just stood there, silent and awed, like they were witnessing something impossible. Lyra stood beside Kael, her hand wrapped in his, and felt something shift inside her, something that felt like hope taking root. We did it, she whispered. You did it. This was your idea. No, we did it. All of us. She looked at the faces around her, refugees and servants and soldiers, all working together toward something bigger than themselves. This is what changes things. Not blood, not tradition, just people choosing to be better. Kael squeezed her hand. What happens now? Now we keep going. We expand. We teach others. A shout interrupted her. Riders approaching! From the south! Everyone turned. A group of riders thundered toward the gates, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. The lead rider, a young man with a bloodied face and terror in his eyes, nearly fell from his saddle. Gareth caught him. What happened? Raiders! The man gasped. Aldrich's men. They've been gathering forces, mercenaries, exiles, anyone who'll fight for coin. They're coming. Hundreds of them, maybe more. They'll be here by nightfall. The courtyard erupted into chaos. Kael was already moving, his voice cutting through the panic. Close the gates. Get everyone inside. Gareth, gather the guard. Marcus, I want every able-bodied fighter armed and positioned on the walls. Move! People scattered, running in every direction. Lyra grabbed Kael's arm. How many of us can fight? Maybe 200. If we're lucky, most of them barely trained. And how many of them? The scout said hundreds. We're outnumbered. Badly. His face was grim. We might not survive this. Lyra looked at the refugees. At the people who'd been given shelter, given hope, given a chance to believe in something better. At the greenhouses with their fragile green shoots. At everything they'd built. Then we don't just fight with soldiers, she said. We fight with everyone. Lyra, these are farmers. Families. They know how to survive, and survival is all we need. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice. Listen to me. Aldrich's coming. He wants to destroy everything we've built here. He wants to prove that people like us, people who don't have noble blood or powerful families, don't deserve to exist. But we're not going to let him, because this fortress isn't just walls and weapons. It's people. And if we stand together, if we fight together, we can win. We're not warriors, someone shouted. Neither was I, but I'm still standing. Lyra's voice rang out, strong and clear. You don't have to be a warrior to defend your home. You just have to be willing to try. You just have to refuse to give up. For a moment, no one moved. Then Senna stepped forward, her 3 children behind her. I'll fight. Another voice. So will I. And me. And us. Within minutes, half the refugees had volunteered. Men and women, young and old, stepping forward with makeshift weapons and frightened faces but steady eyes. Kyle stared at Lyra, something like awe in his expression. You just raised an army. No, I just reminded them what they're fighting for, Chab. The battle came at dusk. Aldrich's forces hit the gates like a battering ram, mercenaries with dead eyes, exiled soldiers with nothing to lose. Men who fought for coin and cruelty and the promise of destruction. But the fortress was ready. Archers lined the walls, their arrows darkening the sky. Boiling oil waited in cauldrons above the gates. The gates themselves were reinforced with iron bars and stone, braced from the inside by dozens of people pushing back against the onslaught. And inside, an army of survivors stood ready. Lyra fought alongside them, not with a sword. She still didn't know how to use one properly, but with her voice, her presence, her refusal to back down. She ran between the lines, carrying water to the fighters, helping bandage the wounded, shouting encouragement to anyone who looked like they might break. "Hold the line! They're just men. They bleed like we do. For your families, for your home." The battle raged for hours. Men screamed. Blood stained the snow crimson. The gates cracked under the assault, but held. Lyra saw Gareth cut down 3 men in as many seconds. Saw Marcus take an arrow to the shoulder and keep fighting. Saw Senna standing on the wall with a bow, protecting her children who huddled behind the barricades. And she saw Kyle, always Kale, fighting at the front lines, his sword flashing in the firelight, his voice rallying the defenders even as exhaustion threatened to drag him down. At one point, a mercenary broke through the line and lunged at Lyra. She didn't have time to think. She grabbed the closest thing, a wooden support beam, and swung it with all her strength. It connected with the man's skull with a sickening crack. He went down. Lyra stood there, shaking, the beam still in her hands. Kale appeared beside her, blood on his face. "You all right? I think I just killed someone." "He would have killed you." "I know, but later. We'll process it later. Right now, we survive." He pulled her back into the defensive line. The fighting continued. And slowly, impossibly, Aldrich's forces began to falter, because they were fighting for coin. And the people inside the fortress were fighting for their lives, for their children, for the fragile green shoots in the greenhouses, and the impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, they could build something better. When the sun rose the next morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Aldrich's army was gone. Retreated, broken, defeated. The courtyard erupted in ragged, exhausted cheers. Lyra collapsed against a wall, her body shaking, her hands covered in blood, some of it hers, most of it not. Kyle found her there. He knelt beside her, his face bruised and bloodied, one eye swelling shut, and pulled her into his arms. "We won," he whispered. "I know. You were incredible. I was terrified. That's what makes it incredible." He pressed his forehead against hers. "We survived. Together. Always together." The wedding happened a month later. Not in the Great Hall, though they could have had it there. Not with excessive pomp and ceremony, though the treasury could have afforded it. But in the courtyard, surrounded by the greenhouses they'd built together. Surrounded by refugees and soldiers and servants and nobles who'd finally learned what mattered. Lyra wore a simple dress, white linen, sewn by Senna and the other refugee women, embroidered with tiny green vines to symbolize growth and hope. Kale wore his crown and formal robes, but he'd insisted on keeping them simple too. The ceremony was brief, no long speeches, no elaborate rituals. Just 2 people standing in front of everyone they'd fought for, speaking vows they'd written themselves. "I promise," Kale said, his voice steady, "to see you, to hear you, to fight beside you for whatever time we have, to build something worth protecting, and to never forget that strength without compassion is just cruelty by another name." Lyra's hands trembled as she took his. "I promise to stand with you, to challenge you when you're wrong, to support you when you're right, to remember where I came from, and to never stop fighting for people who can't fight for themselves." Gareth, serving as witness, smiled. "Then, by the authority vested in me by the king, and I guess the queen now, I declare you married. You may kiss." They did, and the fortress roared with approval. Afterward, as they stood on the walls looking out at the wasteland that no longer seemed quite so hostile, Lyra felt Kael's hand slip into hers. "Ready to change the world?" he asked. She smiled. "We already did." "Then let's keep going." And together they walked back into the fortress they'd fought for. The fortress they'd saved. The fortress that was finally, truly theirs. Below them, in the courtyard, people danced and laughed. The greenhouses stood proud and full of life. Children played in spaces that had once been cold and cruel. Lyra Vance, the invisible girl who'd scrubbed floors and survived on scraps and been told her whole life that she didn't matter, was now a queen. Not because of blood, not because of power, but because she'd proven that the harshest worlds don't just create warriors, they create leaders. And the world would never be the same. Months passed. The greenhouses expanded. Trade routes reopened as other fortresses saw what Iron Peak had accomplished. Slowly, the old order began to crack. Other half-bloods found their voices. Other servants stood up. Other outcasts dared to hope. And in the tower where it all began, Kyle and Lyra stood together, watching the sun set over a world they were helping to remake. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyra asked quietly. "Choosing me over everything else?" Kale turned to her, his eyes soft. "Not for a single second." "Even when it was hard?" "Especially when it was hard." He pulled her close. "Because the hard parts are what proved it mattered." Lyra leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged. Not because someone had given her permission, but because she'd fought for it, survived for it, chosen it. And in choosing it, she'd changed everything.